negative ads don't work. We all know that. It's common sense, it's wisdom. Nobody likes negative ads, they turn people off. You don't go to vote because of negative ads. They've made voter turnout go down. They're basically the cause of all evil in politics. In terms of campaign strategies, what I want to talk today about is negative ads and going negative, and the fact that what I've just said is a myth. I'm going to wait for the first PowerPoint slide.
We're not waiting too long.
Go ahead, we can live without it. Keep talking.
Keep talking, okay.
That's for sure.
I'll talk a little bit about how campaign strategies are built. Whenever you're building a campaign, whether it's a grassroots campaign for town council or Reeve, or whether you're running a national or provincial campaign, you've got a couple things that you need to figure out. First of all, you have to decide what you're going to say. What is your message? The message that's going to be primary focus of your campaign. Then you've got to decide how you're going to say it, what your delivery system is going to be. And then ultimately, you just got to say it. And that was written by Joe Napolitan in 1972 in the election game, which is one of the early sort of campaign guides that was put out there for all people who decide that they ever want to become campaign strategists, work in politics, do anything. It's one of the first books that people sort of stumble across and read. So after you've sort of figured that out, you start thinking about what your campaign options are and how you're going to put together what your campaign looks like. And in every campaign, there's a meeting at some point where they decide what the campaign is going to look like. If the campaign is well prepared and well funded, it can look across this entire spectrum of options and decide what they're going to do. A winning campaign will almost always use at least 3 of these strategies. When you look at them, you'll notice that very few of them say run a positive, hope-filled campaign. So deciding to go negative isn't a hard decision. The hard decision is how negative do you go? So a really brief history of negative. It's not new. I did actually find a Roman reference somewhere around 100 BC of a negative Senate attack, but I'm not going to use that one. The first U.S. presidential campaign, real campaign in 1800, was so negative, it almost split the New Union. The Federalists, who had a majority in Congress and held the presidency at the time, sort of, passed an act called the Aliens and Seditions Act of 1798. And they used it to round up Republican newspaper editors, Republican club members, basically anybody who was a prominent Republican, to stop them in the election of 1800. It was absolutely considered one of the most egregious and most partisan acts ever passed by Congress. So to think of what happened with a negative campaign, that's about it. I mean, you think of a democracy, that's not a democracy, that's something that you would see in a dictatorship. Within the Canadian campaign context, there's lots of anecdotal evidence of negative campaigning, and there are negative ads and pamphlets, but when we got into TV negative ads and the lasting stamp that was visible, the first real one would have been the 1988 free trade election. The Liberals ran ads that basically questioned Brian Mulroney's commitment to Canadian sovereignty, that here was a guy who was going to sell out the country. And that was topped in 1993, where we sort of set the benchmark for what is the over-the-top Canadian political ad, which we'll now proceed. Just the first 30 seconds. Technology did not agree with the PowerPoint earlier today, so we're having a bit of a...
It's a Mac.
We're off the Mac on the PC. This is PC.
You know, waiting for this PowerPoint system is great, but we got a short amount of time, so why don't you keep on speaking?
I understand, sir. Just 1 second, please.
It's just a waste of time.
Okay. 1993, Jean Chrétien ad. Kim Campbell, who was running for, she was Prime Minister at the time, launched an ad against Jean Chrétien. And it showed his face, his paralysis in particular, heavily enunciated, and asked the question, basically, this isn't a man that we could possibly have as Prime Minister. It was, it absolutely attacked him on a number of different fronts, but all of them basically showed a guy with facial paralysis as being unfit to lead the country. In response to that ad, the Liberal War Room came back and said, this is past the pale. Chrétien came on TV, made a quip about it. His line was, yes, it's true, I can only speak out of one side of my mouth, unlike the Conservatives who can speak out of both sides of theirs. Long story short, there was a public outrage, and Kim Campbell apologized for the ad, and they pulled it. So negative ads clearly don't work, because Kim Campbell got decimated. There was evidence within internal Liberal polling at the time that the ads were working. They were pulled, turns out, Liberals decimated the Conservatives. So the question is does negative campaigning work? And yes, it does, most of the time. The PowerPoint back? Okay, I'll just, yeah. So negative campaigning does work most of the time. Negative attack ads do not suppress voter turnout most of the time. And negative ads can increase voter involvement some of the time. So how does that work? There's a hierarchy of attacks. In 1988, professors Paul Friedman and Dale Lawton of the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership at the University of Virginia set out to study exactly what types of ads voters find repulsive. So they came up with sort of a list of what were called fair, moderate, and unfair attack ads, and they had people judge what they felt about these. So a fair attack ad is when you mention who donates money to the candidate, when they talk one way and vote another, their attendance record, and their business record. Those are fair attacks. When politicians attack other politicians on those things, voters look at that and go, yeah, that could be right. A moderate attack would be considered something like the political action of party leaders. So if you had the president of the Liberal Party of Canada, who also happened to be on the Sierra Club board, that would be a fair question. Is this person going to be unbiased on environmental matters? That would be a fair question. Current inappropriate behaviors are moderate. So that would be anything from a DWI or an affair, a divorce that was public and got a bit ugly. Those sort of things. People think, maybe that's relevant, maybe it's not. But it's certainly not at the top of it. And personal jokes. Unfair attacks are considered behavior of family members, personal lives of family members, and past inappropriate behaviors. So the theory, this is where the theory that negative attacks boost turnout starts to make sense. The researchers grouped these typical attacks into categories, and they looked at it and said, well, if there's types of attack that people actually view as being fair or sort of in bounds, then they must be engaged by them in some way, shape, or form. And just looking at those, we can actually think about how they affected the last federal election campaign. You look at Jack Layton pointing out Michael Ignatius' attendance record in the debate, and everybody viewed that as it resonated with Canadian voters. At the same time, it came out that Jack Layton, a long time ago, had visited a massage parlor, which would be under the category of past inappropriate behavior, which is considered an unfair attack. And that didn't resonate with Canadian voters. So we see, one did and one didn't. So, mud. It does stick. Successful attack ads are easy to remember, and they're emotionally engaging. If you think back to the last federal election campaign, ask, what was Michael Ignatius' main platform? Some of you could probably ask that, some of you probably couldn't. But if I asked you, where is he from and how long is he staying, you would know he was just visiting. It's stuck. So, I stayed home because it was negative. That's the myth. And the reality is that political consultants, people who work in these campaigns, believe that negative ads can boost turnout and have an impact in engaging voters in most campaigns. The academic research itself is mixed, but the one thing that everybody does agree about negative ads does increase cynicism. So I was going to follow this up with what I said, it could be worse, but I'll tell you about the first political ad, first really big negative TV political ad, which I cannot even do justice to, but you need to look it up at YouTube and see it if you haven't seen it. It's called Daisy. In this ad, there's a little girl sitting in a meadow picking a daisy. She's counting badly. 9, 10, 7, 4, 3, picking off the petals of this little flower. And also a very heavy masculine voice comes on and starts doing a countdown. 10, 9, 8. She's just counting them out. Then a thermonuclear explosion occurs in the background. And it says, the voiceover, male voiceover comes on, and basically says, the stakes could not be higher in this election. It's all of God's children must be protected, or we'll go into the darkness. You can either choose to elect Lyndon Johnson and live, or, and they don't say this, but or vote for Barry Goldwater and die. On November 3rd, vote Lyndon Johnson for president. That was the 1960s. That was the first great negative political ad, and people would say that its resonance was incredible. So I'll stop there and hope that